Well, today we're going to talk about artificial pine regeneration. My name is Randy Russo. I'm an Associate Extension Research Professor at Mississippi State University. And today we're looking, of course, at artificial regeneration. This is the planting of trees or the broadcasting of seeds for regeneration of any type, either open fields or forest land as well. Typically, we plant our seedlings as the most common way of artificially regeneration, but sometimes that really hasn't been successful all the time. We have several factors that are involved in success. One would be species site suitability, seedling quality, critically important, as is proper handling, as well as plant quality. So why do we want to use artificial regeneration? Sometimes we'd like to change the species composition. In some cases, we may have a hardwood land that really is not producing the quality we would like, nor the growth that we would like. So we may want to switch it from hardwoods over to pine. In some cases, we want to switch from a pine species such as shortleaf or pine over to something like loblolly or longleaf pine. We also would like to improve the stand value, and this can be done quite easily through genetic improvement. We also may want to look at controlling our density as well as our spacing. And sometimes natural regeneration may actually fail simply because we lack seed trees. If the decision to use artificial regeneration has been made, the two most important considerations that we need to include is species selection and genetics. In species selection, we need to choose a species suitable for our objectives, and whether they be growth rates or wood characteristics. We have about 4 commercially important pine species in Mississippi: loblolly pine, shortleaf pine, slash, and longleaf. Most of these trees are planted. The most widely planted species of this is the loblolly pine. This is because the greatest amount of genetic work has gone on in that particular area. And it has also shown it has been very rapid growth rates and does a good job against insects and diseases. So loblolly grows well throughout the majority of Mississippi, with the exception on the areas that may have high pH soils or wet soils. So loblolly pine is favored for its rapid growth. Produces more than 50% of the annual timber volume harvested across the state, and it actually resistant to some of the insects and disease problems that we occur. However, it is susceptible to both ice and wind damage. We also have shortleaf pine. It grows throughout most of Mississippi. However, it is rarely planted. It actually grows slower than shortleaf pine, but it is an alternative on our well-drained, drought-prone sites, specifically more so in north of Mississippi. It tends to be lower susceptibility to ice damage, and has been seen in ice storms that occurred in the mid-90s in Mississippi. Also, it is resistant to fusiform rust, but is very susceptible to southern pine beetle, one of our most injurious type of pests. Slash pine is another one, but slash pine grows only in the lower Gulf Coastal Plain portion of Mississippi, those southernmost counties. Slash pine tends to stagnate, if not thin early. It is really susceptible to ice damage, and subsequently that's why it's not found in the northern areas, as well as susceptible to fusiform rust when planted north of its particular range. However, it is better suited to hurricanes than loblolly pine. The final species is that of loblolly pine, which is included primarily on the lower Gulf Coastal Plain portion of Mississippi, along the southernmost type of counties in Mississippi. This has been a species which has been historically dominant in that area, but has dramatically decreased through time. There was extensive logging in the 20th and the 19th and 20th centuries. There's also been a land chain use in that particular, and because a reduction of fire frequency as we kept fire out of our pine stands. It is also one of the most unique southern pines. It has a grass stage where there's little or no height for a certain period of time until it reaches a maturity or a specific diameter to come out of the grass stage. However, this grass stage has been shown to be shortened if we utilize has been shown to shorten with the use of containerized seedlings, and we have adequate site preparation, proper handling procedures, and we use good herbaceous weed control during the first and second years. It is also the species that is least susceptible to fusiform rust and southern pine beetles and a number of other harmful type of insects. Longleaf pine, as we would expect, is susceptible to ice damage when planted north of its native range, and the brown spot needle blight, which keeps it in the grass stage, is a serious problem to deal with. We look at unimproved versus improved genetics. Genetically improved seedlings exhibit faster growth, as shown by the lower picture in the right-hand side of the slide. You can expect at least a 10% increase in growth with each generation. Expect greater volume production, and now today genetics has moved more toward increasing the saw timber quality of the trees. You can also expect earlier thinnings and shorter rotations, in some cases somewhere between 20 to 25 years in some situations. It also has the potential of early movement into a higher value products as we move from pulpwood, then to a higher value chip and saw class, then to actually a saw timber class, and later into the pole class as well. We look at the seed source and the planting zones. If we're using seedlings from out of state area, we need to remember where the provenance is coming from. We want to make sure that we did not move provenances that are not adequate or not good for that particular area. So if we're moving a seed source more than 100 miles north or south, then basically we have to be aware of where that particular seed source is actually coming from. The seedling types that we typically use, majority of it is actually bare root type of seedlings. These are typically 1-0 type of stock. The 1 in that 1-0 refers to the number of seasons in the nursery bed. The second number refers to the number of seasons in the transplant bed. The depiction on the right hand of the slide shows what you can expect in terms of an ideal type of seedling, with height-wise, root system-wise, first order lateral roots, as well as the root-shoot ratio, in order to have a good quality type of bare root seedlings to place in the ground. There are also containerized seedlings. These are grown in tubes rather than in the soil. They come intact with a well-developed, undisturbed type of root system. What this does for you is extend the planting window, and you have a much wider area that you can plant, as long as you keep those seedlings in place in the actual container. You can grow those into very late into the year. With these, typically, because you have a extended window, you increase your survival and the growth on adverse sites. Yes, they're more expensive, and they're a little more difficult to handle in getting them out to the site and actually in planting. If you use these type of seedlings, you have to remember that you have to plant the entire plug under the ground. If not, then what you're going to do is to wick the moisture away from the soil, and the seedling will actually die. This is a picture of containerized seedlings. These happen to be loblolly pine in a supercell tubes, and you can see that they perform very well. This is the type of growth that you can expect after about 2 or 3 months. Containerized seedlings would not be a full year in the container itself. It would only be a shorter period of time. So when you're ordering seedlings, after you make your species selection, you're ready to order. So you place your order sometime during the summer so that you get the adequate number of material that you want in terms of quantity that you want, and specify when that delivery date will be made and what type of method will these trees be delivered to you in. In terms of seedling quantity and the acreage you want to have planted, you have to know that. Then you have to specifically choose the spacing. Typically, we'd like to have between 500 to 600 trees per acre. But if you have different genotypes, genetic types, then this may dictate different type of spacing. A 2.0 seedling or 1.0 seedling coming out of a second generation orchard would be about $60 per thousand, or 6 cents per seedling. If I have a varietal pine, it's going to cost me about 43 cents a seedling. So much higher price for varietal may greatly dictate what spacing that you plant it on. Seedlings are typically planted at different spacing and desired density. At the very bottom of the screen, you see that you have a 7x10 being 622 trees per acre, all the way to an 8x10, which is about 544 trees per acre. Remember, just because you've got a seedlings, you're going to have to make allowance for a cull level. So there will be somewhere between 1 to 2%, and sometimes a little higher than that in terms of culls that should not be planted. If a cost share program is used, check for the minimum trees per acre requirements that you have, but remember that you need to get the very best seedlings in the ground. Pine seedlings are sold by the thousand, so basically when you order seedling, you want to round up to the nearest thousands. Planting season typically runs from December through mid-March. Containerized seedlings you can actually plant from October till about the end of April, maybe sometimes even into May. Most successful planting season, though, usually occurs between January and February, right in the dead of winter here in Mississippi. If planting large acreages, you may have delays can be expected. Scheduling may become out of whack a little bit, and so you want to make sure that your seedlings are on site when you expect the majority of your planting. In terms of storage and care, pine seedlings usually come from the nursery packed either in bales, boxes, or bags. The seedlings need to be planted as soon as possible. You really don't want to store, the storage seedlings that are lifted early or late, because they may not be dormant. So you want to, in that case, avoid storage if you can, and plant them what we call a hot plant, and plant it as soon as you get the seedlings. If you are going to store this material, avoid storage any longer than about 1 month. However, if it's in the dead of winter, a couple of months would not hurt. Avoid storage for longer than 8 weeks, even in a cooler. Shelter your seedlings from temperature, extreme sunlight, and wind. You need to provide some air circulation so you don't actually stack more than 2 to 4 boxes high in the cooler. Use cold storage if at all possible. This cold storage will range anywhere between 33 degrees to 40 degrees. It's best to have it at a constant temperature so that there's not fluctuations in it where the seedlings actually might tend to break bud as they respire within the bags or the bales. You want to water regularly to allow water to drain. You don't want any water to stand on your root systems. What if cold storage is not possible? Then you need really to plant as soon as possible. You need to store it in an enclosed area away from the wind and away from the sunlight. If you can't store it in that particular area, you need to actually heel these in the soil so that the root system is not actually getting exposed to the wind or the sunlight. You would also like to grade your seedlings and remove those seedlings that are either too large or too small. If you can get them in the ground, I'd rather have the large seedlings than the small seedlings. Small seedlings will never be preferred. They will have a poor root system sometimes with smaller ones, and even sometimes the large ones, you'll have broken stems. You want to get rid of those seedlings as well. You want to make sure that none of the seedlings have any bark that's been removed or needleless that have been pulled off. As soon as you actually through what you're grading, you need to keep your root systems wet, either through some sort of dip or actually just adding water to your root systems and then shaking a little bit off and then placing back within the bags. So if we're looking at the specs for our southern pine, all 3 pines, loblolly, slash, and shortleaf, we like to have a total height of seedling between 6 and 12 inches. We want a root collar diameter that's greater than or equal to 1/8 of an inch. We want about 6 to 8 inch root systems, and we want to have at least greater than 5 first order lateral roots. Roots longer than 8 inches can be somewhat problematic, but if you can get that entire root system in the ground, you're better off for that. You need a very, very stiff and woody stem as well. If we're looking at longleaf, it's a little bit different. We want a little taller height of about 8 inches, and then a root collar diameter of greater than ½ an inch. Our stems usually are not present because it's in a grass stage at that particular time. So what we're looking at in our seedling care in the field when we actually take it out, we want to make sure that the delivery to the particular site is all done in one day. We want to make sure that when we get out to the site, we protect the seedlings from both the sun and the wind. That's meaning keep it insulated in either a refrigerated truck or a trailer, and if possible, get it out of the sun and into the shade. Want to make sure that you avoid freezing and thawing of your material. You don't want to expose your bare roots for more than 10 minutes, and if it's greater than 70 degrees, for no more than 5 minutes. You also want to make sure that they're not exposed to winds higher than 5 miles an hour as well. If we're looking at the different planting methods, you have advantages for both. Advantages of machine planting is that it's both faster and more efficient. Typically on a machine, we can plant between 3,500 to 5,000 seedlings per man day versus an individual planting can plant maybe between 800 to 1,500 seedlings by hand. Also, because you're packing them very, very tight with the weight of the machinery, you usually get a better result, specifically for the large seedlings, because they're more difficult to plant by hand and a lot easier to plant by machine. If we're looking at hand planting, the advantages of that, it's really more efficient for small tracts, and it can be used in areas where there's debris, heavy debris, which would actually slow down your machine planting in the field where there is tops and other things that would hinder the movement of the machinery. It's also less expensive to plant by hand as well. What you need to do is, with your contractors, obtain a written contract with the planter. We'll make sure that it includes seedling transportation and handling, the planting dates that are expected to get the site planted, the spacing that you would like to have it at, and any environmental conditions that you might deem necessary not to actually plant at that time. And then you want to make sure that it complies with any inspection guidelines that you will have. So hand planting typically is performed with a dibble bar. We'd like to, if all possible, avoid hodad planting. With that avoidance, you usually avoid most of the U or J rooted type of planting. These are where the seedling actually is planted too shallow, or it's planted in a furrow where it actually turns the root system upward toward the soil, as seen in the picture on the lower right-hand corner. And we really don't want to leave any roots exposed, and we want to make sure that we pack the soil around the roots very, very tightly, so that when you try to tug at the seedling, it is not being easily removed from the ground. Only one seedling should be removed from the planting bag at each time to allow only one seedling to be planted rather than having a double tree planted at that particular spot. An inspector should later come back or look at, while the planting is going on, is there a person there root pruning the seedlings, which we don't want to see on the job site. Make sure that the planters are actually planting them at the correct spacing that we have dictated. Make sure that they're packing the seedlings when they're planting so that there are no air pockets that will eventually lead to mortality problems in your planting. Making sure that the seedlings are planted deeper than the root collar so that we don't have any shallow type of planting. And if we're planting with containers, the inspector should make sure that the top of the plug of the containerized seedling is covered by soil as well. So this picture of the slide shows the various different kind of machine or different kind of implements that we use in hand planting. The dibble bar on the very bottom left-hand side shows a KBC bar on the left and a typical loblolly pine or a pine planting bar on the right. The middle shows a hodad, which a lot of crews have been planting with over time. This will sometimes encourage J rooting, but if used correctly, it can be planted without the J rooting. picture on the top left-hand corner shows containerized tree and the type of dibble that you might use with a containerized tree, but this is basically having to be based upon the size of the container that you use. The picture at the bottom portion of the right-hand slide shows an auger situation where you're planting much larger type of seedlings, basically a 2 or some other seedling that would cause a much larger hole, a larger containerized type of seedling. Machine planting can either be done in multiple type of planting, or you can do a single type as shown in this particular slide. But there's also direct seeding that can be done for artificial regeneration, much like we do in hardwoods. Direct seeding is a process for regenerating the forest through the use of seed, and this is really for pine has been really overlooked as part of a reforestation option that goes on. The advantage of direct seeding is that it's less expensive. We can seed a large number of acres over a very quick portion of time. But the planting window, is typically a lot longer for seed than it is for seedlings. It allows the establishment of a natural root system and development of that particular seed. The disadvantage is that is really lack of control over seedling density, since you're just placing these out and broadcast this type of seedling. Sometimes the seed, you have a very, very little control of the density of the seedlings. Also, dryly soils will actually tend to have much higher mortality in seed because the seed is now on the surface of the soil, and there will be a slower rate of establishment and development, and usually typical to have longer rotations and lower yields. It's also inefficient use, especially if you have genetically improved seed. It's much wiser to be going with genetically improved seedlings rather than genetically improved seed. Site preparation for direct seeding basically dictates that we have an exposed mineral soil, and this can be either done through disking or we can do it through burning. And we can also do this maybe with herbicide control of our vegetation, but this may be also followed by burning. We can broadcast our seed through either aerial or ground-based type of material much quicker if we're doing it with an aerial type of seeding. A row seeder would be an implement on the ground. It would be slower. With that, though, we have some control over our spacing. If you have a very small size area that you'd like to see, then you can actually just do a spot seeding as well. Well, that's all we have for artificial regeneration of pine. Have any questions, please feel free to call me. Thank you.